Hey, Live All Good podcast listeners. It is the latest episode of Move the Needle. This episode is actually going to be in two parts. This first part, we give you a historic reference and talk about the importance of voting as the U.S. midterm elections are right around the corner. The second episode will be in October, where we actually have guests talking about voting and the importance during the midterm elections as well. Stay tuned because part one of the midterm elections episode is coming up next. Hey folks, this is Lee Grigsby here, health and life coach and founder of Live All Good Coaching. I'll be on the air with Podcast Business News Network, talking about the various things around health and wellness and mental health. Also talking about how mindset is critical to achieving the goals that you set for yourself. You can reach me at liveallgood44 at gmail.com, or you can go to my website, liveallgood.com, and fill out the contact form and reach me there. Once again, that's liveallgood.com. Go to the About section, fill out the contact form, or you can reach me at liveallgood44 at gmail.com.
Our priority at Blue Monarch Communications is building your confidence as an effective presenter. Whether you're preparing for a formal presentation, a keynote address, an interview, or presenting an idea or concept to your team or your clients, we are here to ensure that you are poised to effectively communicate your content while engaging and connecting with your audience. Let our team help you shine.
Peace, everyone. This is Ant Boogie, and you're listening to my man, Lee Grigsby, on the Live All Good podcast. Keep it locked. Let's go, coach!
And welcome to the latest episode of Move the Needle. I am one of your co-hosts, Lee Grigsby, here with the co-host extraordinaire, J.R. Ford. How are you, man? How are you?
I am doing well, sir. How are you?
Hey, can't complain, right? Can't complain. So, folks, you know what? I want to say that we have a heavy show, but it's not heavy, but it's important. We've got a lot of information to share with you. For those of you who have been listening to and following Move the Needle since it started, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago that we were doing audio at the time, and we did some episodes on voting and how important it was with the presidential election, but how important it was not just with the federal election. Okay, so JR and I are here again because we are coming up on midterm elections, right? So I know that we typically have some small talk and we're like, hey, but we got a lot to cover. We're actually going to do two parts. All right.
Whoa.
Yeah. So this show is part one. Let me bring up the slides here. This show, sorry about that. This is part one. And we will have a second show that will further the information and knowledge with some guests in October. All right. Because this is all leading up to November. So, Mr. Ford, sir.
Yeah.
Anything that you would like to say before we jump into the information that we want to share with our audience?
Yeah. It's good to be with you all again. I think from the last time you've heard about elections, the presidential elections, and now we're coming up
Mhm.
on the midterm. I think it's important to understand why it's important to exercise your right to vote. We're going to give you a lot of history on the um, limited access to voting that
Mhm.
is historical
Yes.
and kind of a tradition in the United States. So we're going to get into it a little bit. We're going to have some fun conversations, and I'm
And
looking forward to it.
and not a tradition that we want to continue.
That's right. That's right.
Not wanting to continue. So,
Yep.
as you see, we're talking about midterm elections. And like I said, this is part one of a two-part series that we're doing leading up to the elections. So, as you said, why are the midterm elections, or not, no, sorry, not why they're important. Well, that's later, but how do they affect the presidency currently? Right. And I
Yeah.
think that's important to understand. A lot of times, so midterms are kind of this referendum. It's kind of judging the current administration or the current
Right.
president, right?
Yep.
What their approval is, what are some of the long standing issues when you're talking about
Mhm.
economy and jobs. How's the president fared so far, right?
Right.
That's a lot of times what midterms kind of show.
Yeah.
Um, but also, so historically, right, the incumbent president tends to lose ground during the midterm elections, meaning so whichever party is in the White House at the moment,
Mhm.
then in Congress they tend to lose the party changes. So the power structure can change. Historically, since World War II,
Mhm.
the current president's party loses an average of 26 seats in the House and an average of 4 seats in the Senate.
Wow.
So I just that's a big deal,
That's big
especially
context. Yeah.
when we're talking about right now, right?
Mhm.
With things being so close, um, losing 4 seats, excuse me, in the Senate is how do I put this gently? Well, I don't put it gently. I'll just put it.
Yeah.
That will pretty much kill any agenda that the current president wants to pass.
Yeah.
If 4 Senate seats are lost by the Democrats, okay. As we've seen already, it's been difficult to pass legislation. So I'm highly surprised that they passed the um, gosh, I almost forget what they called the act of the oh
Which
it's the environment. Yeah, they passed that together actually.
yeah.
I've got folks.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to put it in the show notes because I'm drawing a blank on what was passed.
The recent
Um,
was it the Green Jobs Act or
no,
the
no, this
no?
was actually a couple months ago. Um,
Oh
the
gosh.
Environment
Yeah.
Act. Yeah,
Yeah.
see,
We'll put it in the show notes.
yeah, we'll
Uh
definitely put it in the show notes, and we'll talk
yeah.
about it coming up in the
Yeah.
next episode as
And I
well.
think you bring up a good analysis of the low margin of error within at least the upper house, the Senate,
Sure,
that there there can be such a small margin of error where the seats can flip by less than 10 seats, whereas in
sure,
the lower house, there are hundreds of I mean there's a significant changeover, but it's not
sure.
as
It's not as
impactful as the
critical.
Senate, because the
Or
Senate is the ultimate approver
mhm,
of drafted legislation to go
yeah,
to get signed up to the president. So that's why it's
yep,
important that even
yep.
if you flip a few seats, it could mean
Well, we know
the
that right now, right?
yeah,
Yeah, with the current structure in the
yeah,
Senate, if any legislation passes, there are times
mhm,
when the vice president has to be the
yeah,
tiebreaker. That's
yep,
how slim the margin is currently.
yep,
So if you flip 1 or 2 seats to
yeah,
the Republican Party, the Democratic agenda does not get passed from the White House
yeah,
for the
and it
second
has
2
happened.
years of their
Yeah,
term. Yeah.
yeah,
So let me go back here. And this kind of shows, I wish I could make this a little bigger.
That's
Um,
great. Yeah.
but this shows the vacant seats that are up in the House and the Senate, what we talked about.
Mhm.
Um, who's up for reelection? So there's 34 seats up for reelection in the Senate. That's
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
Um, in the House, obviously, all these seats are up for reelection here.
Yeah.
But as you can see, right, the red and the
Hmm.
blue, it shows you what is like this. It's a slim margin right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Slim with the Senate for sure. And as you were pointing out with the House, it's a much bigger
You have a bigger
margin,
sway. Yeah.
yeah, to try to change political power.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So while we were talking about this, why are the midterm elections important? Well, for starters, everybody always talks about the federal election, the presidential elections, right? Every 4 years. And while it is true that it is important to vote in that election, there are other branches of government, right? And as you pointed out, the Congress is who passes legislation, but Congress also approves Supreme Court justices, which we'll touch on the Supreme Court in a little bit. Okay. But the importance of this is that if you have, I don't want to call them fighting, but if you have different political parties from the White House and Congress, and there is an agenda that the president is trying to pass, and this is
Hmm.
Democrat or Republican, right?
Yeah.
If the Congress changes power and becomes opposite of what the president is, and if there's no middle ground or working together, which we have not seen in a long time in Congress, then that's what you come up with. Like no legislation is passed,
Yeah.
nothing for the American people. Let me repeat that. Nothing gets done for the American people, not just, oh, this Republican agenda or this Democrat agenda. Nothing gets passed because all the focus is, oh, well, let me block this party. Oh, let me
Yeah.
block this party. And
Yeah.
we're still stuck with inflation. We're still stuck with economy that might be going into recession or not. We're stuck with unemployment rate. Like those things are what hits everybody.
Yeah.
We're stuck with, the administration changing for certain agencies and how those agencies respond to different crises. Everyone remember a couple of years ago? Just saying. So
Yeah.
midterm elections are important.
Critically important.
Man, highly. So also I want to point out a few things about midterm elections, right? This is actually the perfect time to get involved locally. So, yes, again, federal elections are important and even presidential elections, but midterm is where you'll find a lot of local elections that have different referendums, different laws that are up to be passed, or different local offices that
Yep.
you need to vote for. So if you don't if you don't support what's going on in the area that you're in right now, and I'm not on party lines, but if you are not in support of what is going on where you live, this is the chance to make your voice heard by voting in the midterm election, right? So
Yep.
before we talk about these links, man, um, like it, what are your thoughts on the importance of local activity and local involvement at the state level, at regional level? But what are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
I didn't realize, and I think it was just, a lot of ignorance probably, when I was a younger adult,
Sure.
um, not understanding and not having the awareness of the impact that local elections would have on, where my local tax dollars might go to,
Hmm.
or where they're being reduced. Um,
Hmm.
it wasn't until, got married, had kids,
Yeah.
got involved in the local PTA,
Hmm.
at our kids' school that I, was elected a parliamentarian. And I was like, what is Robert's rule of order? Like, what is that? But it was my first real introduction into kind of real hyper local politics,
Sure. Sure.
around a school budget, or,
Hmm.
where funds are being distributed and what programs need to be
Hmm.
prioritized and allocated more over others.
Hmm.
And, I talk about that because that provided me with a door to understand who's my local council person, for example,
Sure. Sure.
we definitely were, I think, more involved, when I lived, across the street from you in local politics.
Sure.
But,
Sure. Well, you got to understand.
having, yeah,
Local politics is like a sport here
I
in
know,
DC.
in
So
DC, yes, like if you're not doing that, what are you doing now?
why are you here? Why are you
I know,
here?
why are you here?
Exactly.
But that was really my introduction into why midterm elections and local elections were
Hmm.
important. It
Hmm.
was, no kidding, talking about, how's the budget going to be allocated for, our kids' school, in the district in that particular zone.
Hmm.
So right now, as a burgeoning, mid 40-ish man, um, over the past probably 5 to 8 years, I have
Hmm.
certainly become much more aware of politics because it is it has been around us.
Yes.
It has been
Yes.
turned into entertainment. You know,
In a way,
um,
it's
a lot of time, we focused
sure.
on primaries, right, general
Yep.
elections, but we
Yep.
have come to understand, I think, anecdotally, that these midterm elections are an indicator of where the current climate is and where it may be
Hmm.
transitioning to, um, for the next, primary general election. So it
Sure.
serves as an indicator for me on where things are trending, like you just said, about the
Yeah.
economy, about jobs, about social programs, about reduction in, whatever, or
Yes.
expansion in whatever. Those are good indicators of where the country is trending to. So
Or
midterms are,
even
yeah,
what might, and not just trending, what
yeah,
things might get passed or might get
yeah,
tabled for the
yeah,
second half of the current White House
yep,
administration, for
yeah,
their rest of their term.
yep,
I want to share before we. I want to share a few links to help people um, kind of figure out, where their local elections are, stuff like
yep,
that. I do want to share, like you said, that your first kind of real introduction
hmm,
was, with the school PTA, right?
yeah,
Well, I have to share that I'm probably, I don't want to call, well, privileged. I don't know, but I'm lucky enough to have been involved in a youth council back when I was before I was even driving, right?
yeah,
So really being a founding member, my hometown of Oberlin, Ohio,
yep,
we had a youth council, and it had formed a couple different times,
hmm,
and when there were no advisors to continue it, then it died out.
yeah,
So I was part of one of the revitalization of it, right? I think it
hmm,
was I want to call it 13, maybe 14 years old.
yeah,
But that was a great introduction into local politics
yeah,
because we actually met with city council,
mm,
met with like the mayor, that kind of thing.
yeah, yep,
And I don't recall any major changes that we did. Um, but I know we would hold, like, learning how to have fundraisers, right?
Right. Yeah.
And how different things are zoned off, what you can and can't do,
Yep.
or again, who is actually in for like youth advocacy, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So if you wanted to do something, if we had an idea, but
Right.
then finding out, oh, well, they have to vote on this.
Yep.
And oh, what do you mean? Everybody's not voting for it? What's that about?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why not? This is a
Yeah.
good thing that we're coming up with as the
Right.
youth, and you all are complaining about us,
Yeah.
like that kind of thing.
Right.
So I was definitely introduced to that at an early age, and I'm
Mhm.
grateful for that
Mhm.
because it had me have an awareness of then wherever I lived.
Mhm.
Again, yes, federal general elections, the presidential elections, those are always important,
Right.
but you have such a bigger voice. You have such a bigger, the vote counts more, and I hate to say it that way,
Yeah.
but your impact is greater
Yeah.
in the area where you live.
Right.
That's and so obviously every state is different because they're different with the population,
Yeah.
but it is super important to really understand locally what's going on and what
Yep.
the officials, what they stand for, who, I don't want to say who they side with, but what different policies and agendas that they
Yep.
have,
Right.
because
Yep.
that will let you know, oh, wait a minute,
Yeah.
let me find out who this other person is.
Yep.
And now midterms is typically when you can vote for someone new. Okay.
Yep.
So, there's a few links that I'd like to share. They're not, I don't have a QR code or anything for them, so you can't scan them while you're watching this. Uh, but for, again, talking about your state and local elections, this link here will definitely take you to the election office. It lets you know, I think there's a drop down list, what
Mhm.
state. If it's a local election, I think it might go by county or a city,
Yep.
but typically county, and it let you know different issues that are going on where you live,
Right.
and
Yep.
I believe might even have where you can go vote. Okay,
Yep. Yep.
so the next one, this is important too. Mayoral races. If you boil it down, mayor of a city is the same thing as the president of the United States, right? Just
Yep.
of that city.
Yep.
So yes, they still have to work with council. There's still checks and balances. It's not a monarchy quite, but sometimes it can be depending on what's going on.
Right.
But it's important to understand if your mayor is up for reelection, or what's the mayor been doing,
Yeah.
right? What
Your
has the mayor been
opportunity.
doing? Yeah.
Yep.
So, wow, if you don't like what the mayor's been doing, okay, well, see if they're up for reelection, and maybe it's time to change your vote.
Right.
That's what this is for. Also, this link I think is really important. It lets you
Mhm.
know different dates and deadlines. As you mentioned before, JR, there are primaries where you have all of the candidates for different parties
Oh yeah.
campaigning, right? Trying to get
Yep.
a political seat or a
Right.
political office. This link here lets you know the different dates by, I'm pretty sure it's by state, by
Yep.
county, also deadlines of when you might need to register,
Yes.
right? There are
Very important.
deadlines. If
Yep.
you are not registered, first of all, and you're listening to this, go register to vote.
Stop the podcast.
Yeah, pause it right now.
Pause it and
Go
come back.
get registered. We're and again, we're not here to tell you anything about how to register or not what party, right? Fine. Be independent, be Democrat, be Republican. I am not going to tell you who to affiliate yourself with.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I'm telling you in some of the information that we're going to share after our break is why you need
Yeah.
to exercise your right to vote and be registered to vote. It's super important.
Yep.
But yes, this link here lets you know about different deadlines. Again, different dates of um, if it's a primary or everything leading up to November, which is
Right.
this typically when the midterm elections happen. Okay.
Yeah, those dates are important.
Yeah.
My mom voted in June and I voted
Hmm.
yesterday. We're in two different states. So
Hmm.
I didn't know that she had voted that early, but I,
Yeah.
I thought that usually you vote in the fall, but that's
Right.
not
It's in
always the
November.
case.
No,
So
not
yeah,
always true. It
for the
could be different
primaries, yeah.
dates,
Yep.
different times because yeah, they're trying to narrow the field
Yeah.
for November.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, I think we've got a lot more information historically and timeline wise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you sink your teeth into it. So why don't we take a break now? And when we come back, we will really take a deep dive into historical facts and timelines of voting. What do you say?
Sounds good.
All right. All right, folks. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Our priority at Blue Monarch Communications is building your confidence as an effective presenter. Whether you're preparing for a formal presentation, a keynote address, an interview, or presenting an idea or concept to your team or your clients, we are here to ensure that you are poised to effectively communicate your content while engaging and connecting with your audience. Let our team help you shine.
Listen to Keeping the Towel with Aunt Boogie on SoundCloud, Anchor.fm, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. A new episode is dropped every first and third week of every month. Once again, Keeping the Towel with Aunt Boogie. Wipe the blood, wipe the sweat, wipe the tears. But whatever you do, don't throw in your towel.
Hey, folks. This is Lee Grigsby here, health and life coach and founder of Live All Good Coaching. I'll be on the air with Podcast Business News Network talking about the various things around health and wellness and mental health. Also talking about how mindset is critical to achieving the goals that you set for yourself. You can reach me at liveallgood44 at gmail.com, or you can go to my website, liveallgood.com, and fill out the contact form and reach me there. Once again, that's liveallgood.com. Go to the About section, fill out the contact form, or you can reach me at liveallgood44 at gmail.com. All right, folks, welcome back from that break. We are here with your latest episode of Move the Needle, Lee and JR, talking about midterm elections. And in the first segment, you heard about why it's important. We talked about the importance of really being involved at a local level during midterms. Also, why it's important to actually turn out for the general election because it really helps shape federally what can happen for the next couple of years.
Mhm.
So, pretty important. But we want to take a bit of a turn right now to really give you some historical context as to why it is important to make sure one, you're registered to vote, and two, to make sure you exercise that right to vote.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and jump in here. We're going to talk about the Voting Rights Act. You can look at the link here and get the information you want. Mr. Ford, what would you like
Yeah.
to say about the Voting Rights Act, sir?
So the reason why we wanted to start with the Voting Rights Act was it was passed during a very stressful time in this country's history in
Mhm.
1965. So if you think about that time, there were a lot of civil rights protests going on. There was certainly rampant racism throughout the country. Jim Crow was still in
Hmm.
full effect. And for people who don't know about Jim Crow, there were norms um, and traditions of um, inequality in treating
Hmm.
people less, mainly Black
Yes.
people.
Yes.
So I bring that up because the Voting Rights Act itself enforced the 15th Amendment, which was passed back in, is it 1870? Back in the
Yes.
1870s. Um,
1870. Yes.
yeah. So
Hmm.
the Voting Rights Act enforced a law that was already in action,
Yeah.
in legislation.
Hmm.
The reason why the Voting Rights Act is so important was it was the critical piece that that pulled away all of those restrictions from state state voting in
Yes.
terms of harassment, in terms of poll taxes, in terms
Hmm.
of literacy tests
Yeah.
that
Oh,
was
yes.
required
Hmm.
to actually go and vote. So
Hmm.
that was the major enforcement function, that any laws that were to be passed by a state government had to be reviewed and approved by the federal government.
Yes.
Full stop.
I want to jump in here because
Yeah, go for it.
I want to actually put some different context to this, or not
Hmm.
even different, but maybe
Add on to
piggyback
it.
on it.
Put some seasoning
Yeah.
on top of it. Yeah.
So you heard us on Move the Needle talk about what just happened recently with the overturning of Roe v. Wade,
Yep.
and basically how the Supreme Court ruled that they took away the federal protections at the
Yep.
state level, right? So now every state can kind of do what they want with
Yep.
abortion laws.
Yep.
That's in a nutshell what happened.
Yep.
This is exactly what we're talking about here with the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment was already a law for almost 100 years.
Yeah.
I'll say that again for those who didn't hear it in the back. The 15th Amendment, and we'll have a timeline, you'll see that coming up,
Yep.
was already a law that was on the books over or almost 100 years before it got enforced.
Yeah.
Mm.
Isn't that it's mind
Before it got
blowing.
enforced.
It's
Yeah.
not surprising,
No.
but it's definitely it hits hard because you think
Hmm.
about it, that's our grandparents, you
Hmm.
know, those are our
Hmm.
great grandparents who didn't have the ability. I wouldn't say the ability, but had so many obstacles placed in front of them that they had to
Hmm.
navigate through just to exercise
Uh,
their
the
given
right
right
by law, by
by
law,
law. By
by law.
law.
So, and you've heard us talk about Reconstruction era as well a lot here on
Yeah.
Move the Needle. So that's why a little bit later we're going to give you this timeline to
Yep.
really put it into context of like what things went on in the brief history of this country. And we're not even talking about the slavery years. We're talking
Yep.
about post slavery years.
Yep.
Okay? Um so yes, I will
Yep.
move on. I will not stay on my soapbox for long. So
So
this
I
is the next
wanted
thing you wanted to
to,
mention.
yeah, I wanted to just briefly talk about one of the more well-known organizations, nationally known, the American Civil Liberties Union,
Mhm.
that has a fairly robust and comprehensive effort to ensure that you know where to vote, you know
Yes.
how to vote, you know how to register. They have a
Mhm.
lot of great information for for the average citizen to go out there and to learn about. It's a
Yes.
great, front page. I know we talked about some of the other links here. But
Sure.
the ACLU also has some great information in there too, where they start to help build out this timeline
Hmm.
of this rollback of voting rights.
Yes.
And the one thing I wanted to highlight in these bullet points here, or a couple of them, were um, A, in 2008, we had the most diverse electorate in US history, which meant
Hmm.
that we had diversity in culture, in politics.
Hmm.
Um, there was a wide, very wide audience taking notice. And if you
And
remember
that
what
was
happened in 2008, it was Barack Obama's
yes.
first election.
And
So
and
that's why. Yeah.
and to be fair, that's not that long ago.
It's not. It's
That's
not.
not that long ago.
Yeah.
That's it really is not. I mean, I
It's like
know
a
that
teenager's age, ago.
yeah. We've gone on 16 years.
Yeah,
16
yeah,
years is not that
yeah.
long from
And
when we
the
had
other, yeah,
oh, I wanted
oh,
to just that first bullet
yeah,
point.
yeah,
I'm just searching for the words.
yeah,
It it took until 2008 to have the most diverse electorate in U.S. history.
yeah,
It took until 2008 to have the most diverse electorate in U.S. history.
yeah. That's something.
It
That's saying a
shouldn't.
lot.
Yeah, it
But
is.
I think there's also this assumption that everyone has access to vote, and I think
Mhm.
we sometimes put guards, or we have tunnel
Oh, like
vision about
bloggers. Yeah,
access to vote,
sure,
availability,
sure.
access to your polling location. Well, if you think about it, also in 2008, when Barack Obama was elected,
Mhm.
he was the first person of color,
Yes.
non-white male, to be
Mm,
elected as president.
mm.
And people thought that, that was it. Like, we have achieved
We've
equality.
we've arrived.
We
Yes,
have
yes,
done it. And it was
yes.
an incredible moment.
Absolutely,
But that
absolutely.
was one of those moments that we can talk about and will go through history as a milestone in this country's
Mhm,
evolvement, and maturation.
mhm,
The other 2 points I wanted to quickly touch here are also leading up to the 2013
mm.
decision by the U.S. Supreme Court was
Yes.
the surge in state level measures to
Mm,
restrict voting access. So in 2011, 2012, there was this
mhm,
huge surge at the state level to start to restrict access to votes, to
mhm.
voting. And we'll get into a bit more of that, but these are some major kind of current events that have led us to kind of where we are now,
Yeah.
that has really kind of, I think, has eroded some of the integrity in what we feel that this is a democratic voting process. So
Yes, and I wanted to piggyback on something you said.
yeah,
So back in 2008, huge momentous occasion where
yep,
the first person of color was voted, non-white male was
yeah,
voted in as president of the United States.
yep,
And the reason that we're pointing these historic things out is, progress is moving forward, right? And once you get to a certain milestone, once you get to a certain level, the goal is to always evolve from that level
right,
forward more, right?
yep,
What we have seen since 2008, um, it's not just political, right? While there has been more awareness of diversity and more call for celebrating diversity on many different levels, racial, gender, all of that, what we've seen is such a pushback on diversity, such a pushback. So while you can't do it legally,
hmm
There are loopholes in things that politicians play with and try to manipulate in order to roll back the timeline to some things we'll show you.
Yep.
So just wanted to point that out. Let's I'm going to move on to this next slide here because
All
this is
right.
what really
Yeah.
talks about what the Supreme Court did in 2013.
Yep.
Go ahead. Go for it.
So yeah. So if you recall what we talked about the gutting of the Voting Rights Act in 2013, what that
Mhm.
really meant was the pre-clearance, the pre-approval of state voting laws that
Mhm.
was enacted in 1965 through the Voting Rights Act. That amendment, that sub-amendment, that sub-language was removed in the decision that was decided back in 2013. I don't
Mhm.
recall what the case was, but it essentially removed that pre-clearance out.
Mhm.
And now states could reenact uh, voting restricting legislation. And that's what we have seen for the past 9 years.
Yes. So even
Yeah.
to your point,
Yep.
I want to string my own timeline together,
Hmm.
even though we have a
Yep.
timeline for everybody.
Yep.
So let's just say 1870 was when the 15th Amendment was made law
Hmm.
about the right to vote. We fast forward, it doesn't get enforced until almost 100 years later in
Yeah.
1965. Okay.
Yep.
So then the you this I'm gonna try to bring it down a little bit, but this is why the
Yeah.
midterm elections and elections are so important.
Yeah.
So then from 1965 we go up until 2013. Okay, with the evolution of equity to vote, not equality, equity. Okay. So in 2013, the United States Supreme Court that should make rulings that are fair and just for all American people decided to remove and strip some of the language that really was the heart of the Voting Rights Act that enforced the law from 1870.
Right.
So, really, in 2013, we were trying to roll back everything that was before 1870.
Yeah. I wonder. I don't know what the case was, but I wonder what was in the decision. What was
Sure.
in the public decision that was
I
made.
and I don't remember the case either, but I know it
Yeah.
was 5-4 decision.
Yeah.
So again, this is what matters when you're voting in a presidential election,
Hmm.
you're voting in a midterm election. You are voting for people who put Supreme Court justices in place. Now, we don't vote for them. We probably should, but we don't. And
Yeah.
their terms are typically for life.
Yeah.
So
That's
as you
huge.
as you
Yeah.
see, they were already kind of rolling things back
Hmm.
before they got to Roe versus Wade. Okay?
Yep.
Before that. Okay, moving
Let's
on.
keep going. Let's keep going.
Ready for more? All right. Well,
All
we
right.
talked
So
about the timeline. So here we
this is
go.
where we get into the meat and potatoes of why the country is at this precipice and has been at this precipice
Mhm.
for I want to say, for the last 8 years or so. Why
Oh,
we're
well,
here now in terms of voting integrity and trust. So let's get started with the
before we hit the
history. Yeah.
timeline, I'll come out
Yeah.
and say it for you.
Yes.
We're here because of the clown show that has been in place from 2016 to 2020.
Well, you're not
Yes.
supposed to say it in front of company.
I and I say that, folks, not to demean any political party, because that display of administration was not about politics.
No.
It was not about politics at all. So, yes, that is my personal opinion. And yes, I am reflecting it for myself. I am not
Yeah.
saying anyone else has to feel that way. There
No.
are several
But
who do, several who don't.
yeah, that was
Anyhow,
certainly, yeah, certainly a
yeah,
lightning rod moment, to say the
absolutely.
least. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I just had to say that. I will move on to the timeline.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go for it. All right.
Absolutely.
So this country was created 1776. Yay. We got the Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights. What? Who can
Yes.
vote? What? Only
Oh,
property owners can vote.
oh, wait a minute. And back then, from what I recall,
Yeah.
there were humans that were property. Correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just,
So
I,
just putting in context.
sure, sure.
Um,
Yep.
Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights,
Hmm.
um, forms the country. Sets a path
In
for,
motion. Hmm.
yep, for how this country will be formed.
Hmm.
Um, if you look at between 1856 and 1868,
Hmm.
you'll see that there was a change in the law. You'll see that it says all white men, which meant that
Yes.
before that time, between 1776 and 1856, that meant
Hmm.
that only primarily wealthy property owners could vote.
Hmm.
That meant that
Hmm.
poor white men
Hmm.
were of less value, they were inferior. But
Correct.
because there was this surge that was happening in the mid 1850s,
Hmm.
um, there was this change because there were people who were starting to obtain property.
Sure.
I mean, not there. There was majority slaves, but there were property owners.
Yes.
So what that meant was that if you had property, you had value, and if you had value, you had wealth. What happened in 1856 was they said that,
Hmm.
whoa, wait a minute, that's not right. These people are not equal to us, meaning
Hmm.
slaves and probably freed people of color. They
Hmm.
are not equal
Hmm.
to us. But guess
Hmm.
what? This is how we as white men can get other white men to feel more than and not less than, because
Correct.
if you're poor, you're pretty much on the same playing field. But guess what? These
Hmm.
people, these enslaved Africans, are of inferior quality. They are not human. They're subhuman. That's what we were.
We're not
Yeah,
citizens yet. I,
not
I
citizens.
I did want to
Yeah,
point out,
yeah.
so before the 1856,
Mm-hmm.
where all white men could vote,
Yeah.
also putting into historical context the expansion out west
Yes.
and the yeah, okay, there's no easy way to
Yeah.
say this.
There, it's
The
all.
the the
Yeah.
the conquering of the indigenous people
Yeah.
were already well, they were
This
already in
was
this country,
already happening.
but
This was
already moved
already happening.
the
Yeah.
expansion out west. So before all white men could vote, right? All
Mm-hmm.
property owners. So if you went out west and started claiming property, and then we don't have the timeline of the states,
Yeah.
but then if you were a property owner in that state, guess what? You probably were the wealthiest man in that
So
state.
yeah, and I'll let you know that based on that expansion, there were federal laws that were put into place that held land for immigrants, for European
Mhm.
immigrants. It's a fact.
Yes.
You can look at a lot of
Yes.
history. You can look at, I was raised in Maryland, but went to a farm in Southern Maryland and learned that it was a part of an Establishment Act for, I think it was I'm not going to get the nationality correct, but it was
Mhm.
for European Americans
Mhm.
or
Yes.
Europeans who were coming over,
Yes.
and this
They
was
they
back
weren't
in that
here
time.
yet, but it was setting aside, "Oh,
Yeah,
here, let's
yeah,
get you your piece of the pie."
right.
Yeah.
It's not,
Mhm.
these are not hard facts to look up. I mean, if you really want to dig deep, just spend like half an hour to
I was
an
gonna say
hour.
we're
It's not
scratching the
hard.
surface. We're
I know it's
scratching
not
the
hard,
surface for
and
sure.
if you care,
Yeah,
hopefully you can.
yeah,
But anyway, let's move
sure.
on.
Okay, so
All right.
here we get to 1870. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've talked about that year a lot. That is where the 15th Amendment was created, and and I know I'm gonna let you take the rest of these,
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
but I just want to point out that federally, you could not deny someone the right to vote based on race. 1870. So this
Yep.
was, if you guys have heard me, I'll come back on camera here. You guys have heard me talk a lot about the country actually tried to get it right. They actually tried to get it right for about 4 or 5 years during
Yeah.
Reconstruction.
Yeah.
This was part of that, right?
Yep.
That you could not deny someone the right to vote based on race. But look at the rest of this timeline. I know I told you I'd let you take the.
Hmm.
I'll take this slide. I'll take this
Go
one.
for it, man. Go for it, man. I'll add my
Like,
little, I'll pepper in
so
my
so
comments. Yeah.
how do we go from you cannot deny someone the right to vote, but then 6 years later, the people who were already here, oh, they don't have the right to vote. Oh, that's because you don't really consider them citizens. Okay. Then 6 years after that, oh, you're not a European immigrant. You're a Chinese immigrant. Oh, so you don't get to vote either. Because,
But why were they here? Why were Chinese people here? Why?
oh, weren't they trying to find more land and a better life just like the European folks were? Yeah.
Well, I'll let you in a
Or,
little bit
or,
on that.
or I know there's another reason I'm
There's
being
another reason,
sarcastic there.
when you go out west and you want to have transportation and the railroads, they
Mhm.
played a significant role in that. And they were, inexpensive labor, and they were here.
Oh,
So,
kind of very similar
yeah,
to how the economy was built from the South on slavery,
yeah,
although it
very,
wasn't
yeah,
quite slavery,
yep.
but yet there was a Chinese
Had sprinkles,
Exclusion Act.
had sprinkles, yeah,
Oh, oh.
had sprinkles
Anyway,
of racism and yeah,
mm.
on top of it.
So again, I just want to point out in 1870, federally, you could not deny someone the right to vote based on their race.
Yeah,
But within the 12 years after that, we were like, oh no, well, you're not a citizen, so you can't vote. Oh no, you're not a
yeah,
citizen, so you can't vote.
yeah,
We're back to the white men who
yeah.
can vote. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
All right.
So, and another thing to highlight
Sure.
in this timeline is, so Civil War was,
Hmm.
concluding.
Hmm.
You had Reconstruction happening. You had the Freedmen's Bureau being created.
Yes.
You had a lot of opportunities for people of color to start to um,
Have
uh,
equity.
have equity, have independence.
Hmm.
And when you see that there are groups of people who are coming into power, into influence, into money,
Hmm.
into creating their own independence, that starts to create a lot of, I want to say, apprehension and consternation, because if
Hmm.
they were formerly enslaved and now they are generating their own income and making their own money and being self-sufficient, that means that
Hmm.
they're gaining power. And this,
Oh, you
yeah,
mean they can be, if I'm playing a white man here back
yeah,
in the 1800s, you mean that okay, we've now freed my slaves, so I don't have any more property. I don't have the economy from the what was made from my
yeah,
property,
yep,
and you're telling me that they have the same rights that I do?
and
Because
you'll pay them.
now,
Yeah,
wait, and wait, what? That's what you're telling me?
yeah.
We
I mean,
can't.
you free them, right?
Nah, we can't have that. We
You
can't
tried
have
to
that.
pay. We tried to pay you for
Mm-mm.
the. for each
Nope.
one, but you didn't
We
want
can't have
that.
that. So we've
I'm being tongue in cheek, but
I know.
this
I know.
was a reality for
Yes.
newly freed Africans and people of non-European descent. It was a fact. Um,
Yes,
yeah,
this is just a brief description with this timeline
yeah.
here.
We're
So
skimming the top.
not even digging deep.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Anyway, yeah,
we'll jump into the
yeah,
1900s now.
yeah,
Okay, go for it.
yeah. So if you think about, you know, women's suffrage and
Mhm,
equality in the early part of the 20th century, you think about women's right to vote, um,
mhm,
and this huge movement by a lot of pioneers and advocates, um,
absolutely.
you know, for the equality. That was great. It helped to drive a narrative and a conversation that ultimately granted white women the right to vote.
Mhm,
It just didn't grant black women, black men, anyone else the right to vote.
nope.
And I think that's something that when you talk to or you ask questions about women's suffrage around that
Mhm,
time, it was
mhm,
not inclusive. And that is, if you dig a little deeper into the movement, it was
mhm.
not inclusive at all.
No, and I
Um,
mean we highlight that with in 1926 in Birmingham, Alabama.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, that's a
Exercising
fact.
their right.
Mhm,
The audacity. I think back to all these different events, that we're
mhm,
highlighting, and to imagine that there was a large part of society that had the audacity to restrict my body, my mind from
mhm,
doing what is a right that everyone else, had the ability to do,
mhm.
or at least people that lived
Right.
in this country. So
Right.
it's really eye opening to think that people peacefully protesting for their right to vote
Sure.
were attacked by
Mhm.
other citizens and by police and
A-
by law enforcement.
And I even want to point out just what we highlighted here.
Hmm.
This was election officials,
Hmm.
not citizens, not the police force, right?
State
Not
government, local
the
government officials.
election officials in Birmingham did that.
Hmm.
1926,
Yep.
you know? So, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I know we we touched a little bit on the restriction of Chinese Americans,
Mhm,
and we see that being reversed in the Asian community being granted the right to vote.
mhm,
Um, and it took about 13 years for the Voting Rights Act to come to light. Why is that? If you think about that time, 50s and the
mhm,
60s, you
mhm,
had the civil rights movement growing over the
mhm,
years.
mhm,
By 1965, it had hit an ignition point where we had the Voting Rights Act, we had the Civil Rights Act. We also had a lot of turmoil in throughout the country. We had
mhm,
a president who was assassinated. We had major civil rights icons who were assassinated during that
mhm.
time.
Yep,
Something had to be done,
absolutely.
and this
And
was it, the Voting Rights Act.
again, just to clearly put my own timeline together in the timeline that we're showing you. Yes, the 1965 Voting Rights Act enforced the 15th Amendment that was on the books in 1870.
Of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights.
1870. It took
Yeah.
almost 100 years to enforce a law that you could not basically deny someone the right to vote based on their race. Why did that
Yep.
take 100 years? And I also wanted to point out what we've been showing you. It was not just about black people, right?
Yeah.
Or the newly freed Africans who had been enslaved.
Hmm.
As I've been saying all along, the system was designed to keep white men and white male property owners in power. That's what it was designed for. That's
Yeah.
why we're showing you this timeline. Because now, when there was pushback, or when, as you so eloquently put, when people were starting to get independence, when they were gaining wealth, not at the expense of people who are already here,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
generational wealth, the powers in place then said, oh, wait, that's becoming too equal. We can't have that.
Right.
So that's where all of these non legal but loophole tricks started to happen. Okay. Oh man, sorry.
It's a lot.
Had to come
No,
out on camera for that one.
yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I from the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of um, efforts to return voting rights to citizens.
Hmm. Hmm.
People may have read about several different stories on former inmates and former
Sure.
federal convicts having their voting rights restored. I think there was a huge effort in Florida.
Hmm. Yes,
To help restore voting rights
for returning
for
citizens.
formerly incarcerated, yeah, for returning citizens into society.
That was part
Um,
of the
yeah,
podcast episode that we did 2 years ago. We had
yeah,
talked to someone who
yes,
was a huge advocate for
yep,
the rights for returning citizens
yeah.
in
He was
Florida.
he was a formerly incarcerated person as well.
Hmm.
One of the people who led that effort. I
Hmm.
believe that he went to law. Did he? I think he got
Yeah,
his
is
Juris Doctorate.
in while
Um,
he was incarcerated. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
just incredible.
Hmm.
Just to touch on a couple of points here about we've touched on this a couple of times about the Supreme Court um, deciding to weaken voting rights by removing
Hmm.
the pre-clearance language from the Voting Rights Act,
Hmm.
which in essence directly enforced the 15th Amendment.
From 1870.
Yeah. So when you hear about states' rights, whenever you hear,
Mhm.
and this is just my opinion, but I think it's also a dog whistle.
Sure.
And people don't know what a dog whistle is, or I forget the other phrase. Um, if you hear those types of phrases and
Mhm.
you hear about states' rights, what it really is talking about is returning the limitations that were set in place in a time where race and independence
Mhm.
were being promoted. Um, and returning to states' rights means that federal government doesn't have any intervention, doesn't have any
Mhm.
authority,
Mhm.
and the states can essentially do what they want. They can put in place gerrymandering
Mhm.
legislation to redistrict. This goes for both, major political sides.
Sure. Sure. We're not just
They
saying one or the
redraw,
other.
yeah,
Mhm.
they redraw lines, and
Mhm.
that is a fact of the matter for both parties. But what
Mhm.
happens is when you start to do that, or when you continue to do that, it affects voting access for
Mhm.
communities of color.
Mhm.
It also, when you talk about limiting access, there are limited polling sites that we have come to know that have been, that we've learned about. So, to
Mhm.
your point here on the next slide about 2018, and 70% of the voters who were purged from the voting system in the state of Georgia were black.
Mhm. Mhm.
You
Now,
want to? Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I gotta jump in here. I gotta jump in.
Yeah,
So, yes, let's start with, should they have even been purged from the voting roll in the first place? Right?
yeah,
That was a one the purging was one way to control this equity of who was actually exercising their right to vote. So the fact that 70% of Georgia's voters were black that were purged from the voting system means that they've got to go through the process all over again. So imagine showing up to the polling place, you have no idea that you've been purged. Like you didn't get a letter, you didn't get an email, you didn't get something. You just show up with your ID and like, "Oh, no, you're not registered here." Well, I voted 2 years ago. 2016, right? How am I not on the roll here? That is something that happened, you know?
yep,
This tends to happen with the counties. It tends to happen in the metropolitan areas because that's where a lot of people of color are living.
yeah,
There's less concentration of people of color in the rural areas.
yeah,
But understand that the gerrymandering and the purging of the voter system, all those affect everybody.
yeah.
It just so happens that one of the things we're pointing out was in Georgia, right?
Hmm.
But imagine if you're what should happen, right? What sounds fair and what sounds equitable is based on the population. So if you are in a heavily populated area, not any particular race, heavily populated area, that area should have more access with voting polls, voting
Yeah,
registrations. That just
yep,
makes sense. The more
yep,
people you have, the more access you have to that. That's not trying to exclude rural areas with less
hmm,
population, but more heavily populated, more access so that it's easier for
yeah,
people to exercise their right. As a coach, I want to help with this little mindset shift here, right?
hmm,
As a coach, when you are talking about how to get people involved, right? And I'm even talking about life. The one thing that we as humans do is do something that's convenient, right? When you're talking about your eating habits, when you're talking about your exercise habits, if it's
hmm,
not convenient, you're not going to do it.
yeah,
Why do you think fast food is a $1 billion business? Because it's convenient. It's not the best thing, but it's convenient for you,
right,
right? So imagine now, take that mindset and apply that to voting. If you make it convenient for people to vote, guess what they're probably going to do? They're going to vote.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah. Is as easy as it is to scroll through Instagram and see an Instagram reel, be on TikTok, on Facebook. Now, I'm not pushing the social media sites should have a say in this.
yeah,
What I will tell you is there is technology available that would make it a public record and make it easy to vote. I'm going to throw out blockchain technology has
yeah,
existed for some time, and a lot of you have heard blockchain technology in the terms of cryptocurrency.
yeah,
It exists in terms of paperwork, and I use paperwork loosely because it's not really paper, it's digital, but
yeah,
it exists in terms of contracts, but it is an easy public record of every transaction.
yeah,
So you could easily, we are all tied to some type of technology these days for the
right,
most part
yep, yep,
on a cell phone. You could easily have voting done with blockchain technology. It's a transaction that's a public record.
cannot be
There
changed.
It cannot be changed. It cannot be
Yep.
duplicated. You can't do it
Yep.
twice.
Yep.
And it would be easily accessible. It
Yep.
would be convenient.
Yep.
But I digress.
Yeah. It's
there are
you.
ways
Yeah.
when you want to change, there are ways to do it.
When this country
So
wants to change.
yeah,
Yeah.
there are ways to do it. That's why we're not arguing with our viewers and listeners about Democrat or Republican. That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because both parties have had numerous opportunities to actually make real change.
Yeah. Yep.
But that's why it's up to us, the citizens, to hold the elected officials accountable for what the system is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
if they don't do that, there are people who choose other avenues.
Yeah. Your vote matters. No matter
does.
how insignificant or irrelevant you feel that your vote may be, it
Yeah.
actually does matter. One vote can change how much your child's school district zone will get for their future budget.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It could be as simple as that.
It affects what type of health and social services your county gets.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
It can determine which hospitals open and which ones close.
Yep.
There is so much involved with understanding how much your vote counts and who you're actually voting for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is critical to pay attention to. Yeah.
Man.
Well, folks, this has been the first part of our two-part series of midterm elections. We hope that we have brought some education for you. We hope we have enlightened you with the information that we've given. And we hope that you are actually thinking for yourself about, well, wait a minute, how can I get involved? Yeah. So if you need to, watch a replay of this episode. Look at the links that we shared. They will be in the show notes as well. Also, I want you to stay tuned for part 2 that's going to come up in October. Yes, we will end up having some guests on here, okay, that will talk about the importance of voting. Maybe we'll dig deeper with returning citizens. We'll dig deeper on different local issues in different states and why it's important. So we appreciate your time with this episode so far. You can find us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon. You can find us on YouTube, and you can find us on Traverse TV, which is a new streaming platform. There's also an app that you can download for that as well. So until part 2, this is Lee and JR signing off.